Welcome back. In this episode, we push our chemical reactors to the limit, diving into some pretty advanced chemistry to create liquid epoxy and polybenzimidazole. It's our most chemistry-packed episode yet. This is Star Technology. Let's get into it. Next up, one of the things we can tackle is being able to make these advanced SMDs. There's 5 different flavors of them: the transistor, resistor, capacitor, diode, and inductor. Now, all of them share something in common, which is that they require this liquid polybenzimidazole as the binding agent that kind of holds it all together. That's what this part of the quest tree here is all about. I think there's 9 steps in total, but it can be broken down into 2 distinct parts, because essentially all this section here is about creating this liquid, and all of this section here is about creating this liquid. And then combining those two, we create liquid polybenzimidazole. We need to build a process for this, and then combine it. So that's what I've got here. 2 of the 4 processes in each of them can be done in a large chemical reactor, and 2 of them in a normal chemical reactor. So that's kind of what I've got set up here. So we'll put normal chemical reactors here, which will feed their products back and forth, and then eventually into this bank of 2 large chemical reactors. And then the same over here. In a large chemical reactor, we're going to need to combine chromium and oxygen, and that will produce something called chromium trioxide. Then reacting it with saltpeter in a large chemical reactor, it creates potassium dichromate and nitrogen dioxide. We'll just do something with that, maybe electrolyze it back into nitrogen and oxygen, or just vent it. It's not that important to us. The potassium dichromate dust is what we're after. Then next, we're going to react the potassium dichromate with dimethylbenzene and oxygen to create phthalic acid and water, which we'll discard. Slow. So that's why we're going to use a large chemical reactor for this. In fact, we are forced to, because it doesn't have a recipe in a normal reactor. And then finally, we'll react phenyl, sulfuric acid, and that phthalic acid to make the diphenyl isophthalate, and then some diluted sulfuric acid. We'll recycle that, obviously, but this is the product that we're looking for. That's the first kind of phase. Second phase, so starting with a chemical reactor, react chlorine and benzene to make chlorobenzene. Hydrochloric acid as a byproduct, we'll store that somewhere. Then we need to create nitrochlorobenzene, which is made with nitration mixture, which we passived like 1 episode ago, reacting with the chlorobenzene and creates nitrochlorobenzene and some diluted sulfuric acid as a byproduct. Recycle that, obviously. React the nitrochlorobenzene with some hydrogen and some copper to produce dichlorobenzidine. Very slow, but it produces quite a lot of buckets. So that's kind of fine, because it's about 10 seconds per bucket. The last step of this side of things involves reacting zinc with dichlorobenzidine and some ammonia to create the diaminobenzidine and some hydrochloric acid. So notably in this reaction, the zinc is not being consumed. It's actually a catalyst. Whereas in the other one, it is consumed. It's part of the recipe. And then, the last step is just combining those two to create some spare phenol and the liquid polybenzimidazole, which is what we're after. Lots of steps, but relatively straightforward because it's all chemical reactors. Some normal, some large. So that's the plan. So we should get to building. As per usual, I've sort of cabled this up already just so that it's a bit easier. But we're going to use all these elite kind of level machines and IV energy hatches to do this build. In some of the steps, probably could have used lower tier ones, but I think it's just easier for power management. So we'll start with this elite chemical reactor, and we're going to need one here as well, so I might as well place that in. We're going to need a source of chromium and oxygen. Let's use an export bus. I need to expand that with the capacity card. Chromium dust and oxygen gas. We need 3 buckets before it kicks off, which it just did. Wow, that was quick. So I'll put a storage bus on that. And then that can be one of the inputs over here. So I'll put an interface on this. I'll set it up with the chromium trioxide and some saltpeter. So we're going to need a robot arm in here. And on that robot arm, we're going to have to put an item filter. So to import, keep exact, we'll drag in the saltpeter, chromium trioxide. Actually, let's just go 16 of each. And that's already making the potassium dichromate as well as the nitrogen dioxide. So we can get rid of the nitrogen dioxide quite easily by just pushing it back into that interface. Now, the potassium dichromate, what I'll do is I'll hook that up with another storage bus. So that can stay in there because that's a pretty quick process from the looks of it. All right, that's the first 2 steps done, because now we have a storage bus here that has potassium dichromate. Great. All right. So next we want to make the phthalic acid, and then we want to make the diphenyl isophthalate. Now these both require large chemical reactors, so behind these two I need to build these, so that's what I'll get to now. Energy hatches. And rotate them into place. Now what we need is some of this chemically inert PTFE casing. We can share the cupro-nickel in the middle. We need these pipe casings there. We need auto maintenance hatches on top. And then we just fill this in, don't we? Two very happy looking large chemical reactors. So over here on this side somewhere, we're going to want an input for the dimethylbenzene for oxygen and potassium dichromate. So what's that? That's 3 inputs, isn't it? So let's do this. So let's go bus, hatch, hatch. Actually, use one of those quad hatches. And then that way I can do that. Hook this up. Potassium dichromate in here. And then in here, we're going to want capacity card, dimethylbenzene, and oxygen. Change that to round robin, and I might just put some accelerators on that. A couple of those should do. And that won't kick off yet because there's no outputs. So what's the output for that? Phthalic acid and water. Dealing with those 2 outputs is interesting. We don't want the water. So what I'm going to do is use one of these quadruple output hatches. So that's a pretty neat little piece of kit. Just like the input hatch, but just for outputting. Because I might just put an interface straight onto that. Before I do that, I'm going to set up a super tank. And then I'll set it up as a storage for that phthalic acid. Interface on that, storage bus on the other, phthalic acid. That should go in there. There we go. So before that gets too out of control, put the machine controller and then a level emitter. I'll say we only want 500 buckets. That seems to be all right. And the water that's being imported here should be going automatically into my upgraded Infinity water cell. So I discovered you can actually add an overflow destruction upgrade to it. So using a cell workbench, which I've just shoved in the corner here, you can add a single upgrade to it. And one of them is the overflow destruction card. So essentially what this means is this is an Infinity water cell, but if the system tries to store more water, it will just destroy it. That is step 3 done. So that's just going to keep creating that phthalic acid. And now we just need to do this last bit. That entails making diphenyl isophthalate. And that's phenol, sulfuric acid, and the phthalic acid. Could do another quad input hatch, I think. Let's put it here, maybe. And then we just need export bus, don't we? Upgrade it with a capacity card. Phthalic acid is one of them. And we need the phenol, sulfuric acid. We are expecting 2 outputs, diluted sulfuric acid and diphenyl isophthalate. So I'm thinking the simplest solution would be just a quadruple output hatch and a storage bus. In fact, that's what I'll do. That will work quite nicely. I'm really liking these new quad hatches. Put a storage bus in there, and then that sulfuric acid should go because I already have a system for recycling that. There it goes. That's the first part done. So now we need to do a similar kind of thing over here. Slightly more complicated with a few little quirks, but that's a good start. Okay, so for the second side of things, we're going to be making some chlorobenzene and related products. So we'll do the same thing we did before. Place down the 2 chemical reactors here. This one is going to be the chlorine and benzene. So that's pretty simple to set up. Put it like an export bus on that, I guess. Capacity card, and then it's just chlorine and benzene. Round robin, let's put some accelerators in there. Program circuit 1, I think it said. Yep, that's looking correct. We're going to put an interface on this, and that will help us deal with the hydrochloric acid. So I'll tell this to export upwards. That should be going into there now. Yep, so we'll come back to that, but that's how we're going to deal with that. Over here is a lot easier. So we'll set up the extended export bus, put a capacity card into that. want the chlorobenzene, and we want the nitration mixture. Put some accelerator cards on that. That's ready to go, except for hooking this up. We're going to need to temporarily store this chlorobenzene somewhere. So I've got a super tank to do that. Like that. Yeah, that'll work. So this is future posty here. As I was editing this section, I realized how stupid the design I came up with was for this, dealing with this chlorobenzene. At the time, it just didn't occur to me how to do it, but I've since realized there's a much simpler way of doing it. So I'm just going to insert this here. So hopefully it doesn't break the flow too much. Instead of having this tank and the emitter and the machine controller, what I've done is I've put a storage bus on here instead. So that's set up to take out the chlorobenzene. And then I've got an import bus on the side, and that's taking out the hydrochloric acid. So between the two of them, it deals with this. And because the chlorobenzene is made so quickly, we don't actually need to store it. So we can use the machine storage instead. And then that will be pulled out into the system. So what I've done to deal with the fact that there's this huge amount here, I've set this up as a priority. So I've set the priority lower so that it's extracted first. So when this machine here needs to use the chlorobenzene, it will use this. And then once this is empty, I'll remove this. That's the situation here. So yeah, sorry for the interruption. Back to the rest of the build. So the hydrochloric acid is being taken out and actually stored elsewhere in the system where we have a storage container for that. So that's cool. So we're going to need a storage bus on this. As before, that diluted sulfuric acid should just disappear because we already have a sink for that. There we go. So that's that part done. It's a little bit messy. We've got to build ourselves another couple of large chemical reactors. So let's get to that. Let's put in the energy hatches. Machine casings. Put the pipe casings in. Put in the actual blocks themselves. Maintenance hatches. And now it's just filling it in, isn't it? We're going to be short, aren't we? Oh no. Look at that. Oh, I didn't actually count how many blocks you're going to need. We had the perfect amount. I don't know how I did that. So the first process over here is going to be the dichlorobenzidine. We need some copper and that nitrochlorobenzene and some hydrogen. So that's pretty straightforward. I'll put a quad hatch in there and just a normal bus, kind of like I did here, I guess. Put that there and put that there. We'll just use the extended export buses again. Copper, some acceleration cards in there. And in here, we're going to need capacity card, round robin, speed. And then we want the nitrochlorobenzene. And I think it was hydrogen, was it? Yeah. Hook that up. That should start filling up, but it won't activate yet. We need an output. What we're going to have as an output? One output. Okay, that's quite a nice surprise. Makes it a bit easier to deal with. Okay, what I might do then, just pipe it from one machine to another. Let's do that. So I'll set up an output hatch facing an input hatch, and that will take care of that one thing going in and out. So the output hatch can go like that. Is that starting to make it? No, why not? I would have thought that would have kicked off. Oh, the hydrogen's coming in very slow. Do I have hydrogen? Surely I've got hydrogen. Okay. I seem to have no hydrogen. That's interesting. I'm going to have to fix that. Place this like that, and that should just go from one to the other. Now, I'm just going to go and figure out what's going on with my hydrogen and come back. Okay, this is a little bit weird. So I've got an emitter that says to stop when there's above 4,000 buckets of hydrogen gas. Clearly there isn't, yet it has stopped. What will happen if I was to cycle this? Okay, maybe I turned it off for some reason. That's weird. Okay, well, yeah, that hasn't been running for a while apparently, so that's why we're out of hydrogen. This is only running on HV power. Okay, let's fix that. Our demands for hydrogen have changed drastically, so let's fix that. Let's go all the way up to IV power, why not? So I'll do that and come back. All right, quick little bit of rewiring under the floor there. And I should be able to just rewire this up. Hydrogen making process should be a lot quicker. Yeah, look at that. What is that, like 2 ticks or something? I can barely even see it. It's happening so quickly. Yeah, hydrogen's starting to come through, which is good. Sometimes things go wrong. You do have to go around and just check your processes sometimes. Means this should have kicked off, which it has. So we've got the dichlorobenzidine in there. We need an input bus to put zinc in, don't we? Just on the top here. I'll pop that in. So let's grab some zinc. That's in there. And what was the other ingredient? Ammonia. Need another hatch somewhere. And an output, obviously. Go there. Yeah. And then this could be the output. Input. Output. Ammonia. That should have kicked off. What am I doing wrong? Ah, okay. We've got two outputs. That's why. So I'll do one of those quad output hatches again. Pop that in. There we go. It's kicking off. So we've got the diaminobenzidine and the hydrochloric acid. So I think what we'll do, well, first of all, we're going to silence these machines. Is we'll put an interface on that and then put a tank nearby for the storage of that diamino stuff. So I guess that could just go there. Put a storage bus on that. Diaminobenzidine, another interface. Put that on there. Pop that in there. All right, 100 buckets. Oh, hang on, what have I done? I have done something wrong. Why is it in the... Oh dear. Yeah, okay. I need to move that hatch. It needs to be one more over. Because there's being block shed between the two, it actually used it for this side, and so it's output into there when it shouldn't. And then that input hatch being there should be fine, even if it's shared. That should be happy. Cool, all right. With some slowness in some parts of this, we are generating this stuff, diaminobenzidine. Combining that with the diphenyl isophthalate, we will be making liquid polybenzimidazole. So that can be made in the chemical reactor. So we just need to put another chemical reactor here somewhere. I guess I could put it at the back here, sort of tucked away. Yeah, I'll do that. So because there's power nearby, I can run that through and put the chemical reactor on there. Extended export bus, which I'll put on this side. Run that cable down. So I'll put that in there like that. Round robin mode. Grab some of those acceleration cards. Put that in like that. So that's already gone in there. Then we're going to need like a super tank on the other side. We'll tell that to output. We're probably going to want to limit that. I'll put it up the front. That's typically what I do. Something we'll use a lot of when we do use it. So let's go 1,000 buckets. The storage bus on that. That's a mess, isn't it? Let's get rid of this one here. In fact, let's do that instead. Yeah. And maybe we should put that on the top surface. Yeah, let's do that. Capacity card, put that into here. We need to import the other thing, which is diphenyl isophthalate. There we go. And that is making phenol because I made a mistake. I should have read that recipe better, shouldn't I? Okay, well, that's not going to work. That's the wrong stuff. All right, I've got to tinker with this a little bit. That's all right. We can make it work. What we need to do is just move that over there. We need to dump the contents of that, though, because that's incorrect. What we can do is put a storage bus on that. Liquid polybenzimidazole. An interface on here. That should work now. Cool. And then the phenol should be being stored somewhere. I think I've got storage downstairs, so that's fine. But there we go. Liquid polybenzimidazole. And it should make 1,000 buckets and then stop. Cool. All right. Well, that's that. I need to go through and re-encode a whole bunch of these recipes. All these ones, the advanced SMD transistor, resistor, capacitor, diode, etc., they all need that. So there's going to be some other things I'm probably going to have to set up along the way, but I'll do that offline. That was pretty involved, a lot of different steps. It's probably one of the more complicated things we've had to create in one single kind of batch, but that is now working. Excellent. All right. So the polybenzimidazole process has been running for a little while, and it's produced quite a lot, so that's great. We could probably start ticking off some of these quests, I reckon. So one thing I didn't notice when I was actually creating this process for making the polybenzimidazole is there actually is a slightly optional thing here for making the phthalic acid. So there's two different paths. You can make it from the dimethylbenzene and potassium dichromate, which is what we did. But there's also a route where you can make it from coal tar and naphthalene. Coal tar is just there to give you the source of naphthalene. So when you distill coal tar in a distillery, you can get naphthalene out. We actually have a lot of that, I think, from our distillation processes. Yeah, 21,000 buckets. And to turn that naphthalene into the phthalic acid, it involves this step here. So with potassium, naphthalene, and sulfuric acid, you get phthalic acid and then hydrogen sulfide. Now, I looked at this process. I didn't feel like making something that would use up potassium and hydrogen sulfide, and then also, I didn't feel like I wanted to do this step, so I did the other one. You may have a different setup in your world if you're playing along. So yeah, just you can choose either. But in either case, I'm going to grab some buckets so I can tick this all off. So I'll just do that and come back. So I've grabbed all of those, and I've also encoded the advanced SMDs and made a whole bunch of them and just picked them up. So there we go, there's some more. And so I can tick all these off. So there we go, look at that. That is the first half of what we need to do for the new circuits. So now we have access to the advanced SMDs. We can build some pretty cool things, and the recipe should be a bit cheaper now as well and faster. So what we need to do next is make this liquid epoxy. That is stopping us from making these epoxy printed circuit boards, which we need for these nano processors. So that is what we're going to do next. So making liquid epoxy is multi-step, as you can probably guess by this part of the quest tree here. So there's benzene, dichlorobenzene, phenol, bisphenol A, wood vinegar, acetone. There's lots of parts in that. And there's all this allyl chloride, glycerol. It's complicated. Like this is going to be a big build, right? Like lots of different parts. And so I created this complicated system of chemical reactors and electrolyzers, I think, just to recycle some things. After a little bit of fiddling around and just trying different things with a system of pumps and filters, I managed to get this kind of design working, and this was my plan. But then I realized something. The recipe for liquid epoxy has a skip in the large chemical reactor. So on program circuit 24, we can combine a few of those steps in those machines that I was planning upstairs into one single step. So sodium hydroxide, epichlorohydrin, phenol, acetone, and hydrochloric acid makes liquid epoxy and salt water. The only one of these we don't already produce or have on hand really is this epichlorohydrin. And it turns out that that can also be made in a large chemical reactor using a skip. So rather than having those 8 different machines, we can get by with just 2 large chemical reactors. That is what I've got here. Now, it takes up more space, but it's a much simpler build in terms of piping stuff around. So that's what we're going to do. Before we get too carried away with this build, we need to figure out how to make sodium hydroxide. So the process for making sodium hydroxide, well, there's a few different options. One of them is to electrolyze salt water, which is what we're probably going to do for the recycling. It's not that fast, and it produces chlorine and hydrogen, which is kind of handy. But there's actually another way of doing it in a chemical reactor, sodium and water. And that is a lot quicker. So that's what I've done here. So this is just an elite chemical reactor sitting here. It's got an input of sodium and water. Obviously, we have infinite water. We have large stocks of sodium, so that's not a problem. And it's producing a bit of hydrogen and producing sodium hydroxide. So it's actually very quick. And so I've just got it limited here. So we'll use that in the process. Probably get started. So let's put in the energy hatches. Rotate them into place. We'll put in the PTFE machine casings. Controllers. Copper nickel, PTFE pipe casings, auto maintenance hatch, fill it in. Done. So the first step will be making the epichlorohydrin. There's 2 different skip recipes we can use for that. This one here is sodium hydroxide, chlorine, propene, and hypochlorous acid. And this one here is slightly simpler. It's sodium hydroxide, chlorine, propene, and water. But I'm going to use this one because I don't have the acid there. So we're going to need a quad input hatch, some kind of an input bus for the sodium hydroxide, and then a quad output. So let's put the inputs towards the back here. And then we can put the output up here. Go to the output, and we'll put the input like that. So let's put some interfaces on there. So this one will be sodium hydroxide, water, propene, and chlorine. program circuit 23. There we go. It has completely filled this already. So we've got the epichlorohydrin, which is what we want. It's a very similar process here. Output hatch here, input bus, input hatch, program circuit 24. Grab an interface for that and that one. We want the sodium hydroxide to go in there. And then this one, epichlorohydrin, phenol, and acetone, and hydrochloric acid. I think next what we need to do is have a place to store both the epichlorohydrin and the liquid epoxy. Put the storage tanks here. We're going to want to control how much these are producing. So let's do that. Storage bus on that and on that. Set this up to be the epichlorohydrin. And then this one we could set to be the liquid epoxy. Let's make sure that this isn't going to run away and produce lots of stuff. So, I don't know, 500 buckets, I think. And then probably do the same for this one, I guess. Seems like the process is pretty quick, so I don't think we need to have heaps on standby. Now that's hooked up. What we've got to do is wire it up. Okay, so that should work. The salt water we want to recycle. I'm going to go over to my electrolyzer and tell it that it can electrolyze that. So I already have a interface here on a non-Apple input. Now I believe I've already got salt water in the system, so it's actually going to start working on that, which it is. That proves that it's working. You get sodium hydroxide, chlorine, and hydrogen. So that's pretty cool. Now that's all set up. So once I put an interface on here, the salt water will be recycled, the hydrochloric acid will be stored, and the epichlorohydrin should go into there. So the epichlorohydrin's already gone into there. So that's very quick. Maybe I'll mute that and this one preemptively. This input bus is going to take the sodium hydroxide. So if we hook that up, that'll start working. So let's do that. Here comes the sodium hydroxide, and then this one should fill up with those. And so that is already working and producing liquid epoxy, salt water, and diluted hydrochloric acid. So since we already have a way of recycling the salt water and diluted hydrochloric acid, we should be able to just put an interface on that, and then the liquid epoxy should appear in there. Look at that. Wow, that's creating it fast. It's consuming this quicker than it's producing it, but yeah, I think we're doing all right. Bit of pre-planning and also realizing that we didn't need to do all these little individual steps, I think has made this a lot quicker. So what we've effectively done is in one step done all these different things here. So normally you'd have to go through lots of different processes to produce this epichlorohydrin. So we did that in one go. And the same for this. Making the liquid epoxy requires these two things to be reacted together. But what we've done is we've bypassed this step here because we're making it straight from the phenol, the acetone, and the chlorine, I think. And now we can make these epoxy sheets and then these circuit boards. All right, well, we have 500 buckets of liquid epoxy already. So that system is working very nicely. So once you have the liquid epoxy, the way we want to make use of it is by turning it into epoxy sheets. So an epoxy sheet, if I make epoxy ingots and run it through the extruder, so I'll do that. So I'll encode a few recipes here. So do that one there. And then I just need a recipe for the ingots. That one there, yep. So I do have a fluid solidifier that already makes use of that. Cool, all right, let's put these in. So let's give this a go. Epoxy sheet. Let's do one of these. That's done. That was quick. And to make an epoxy circuit board, we need to put it into a chemical reactor with sulfuric acid and gold foil. Do we have a recipe for gold foil? No, we don't. All right, pretty simple. Just in a bender, one of those. We need a recipe for that other thing in the chemical reactor. Same thing. Okay, let's do that. That is an incorrect amount. We need 500. But that all looks good. So I've got a chemical reactor over here somewhere. I think this already takes care of circuit boards. Yep, it does. So let's order one of those up. That was nice and quick. Okay, that's cool. Cool. And then the last step is the epoxy printed circuit board. So that requires electrum foil, the epoxy circuit board, and cupric chloride. Or if you've got these other chemicals you're using instead, sodium persulfate or iron 3 chloride. I started using cupric chloride because it's not hard to make and it requires less than the others. Let's encode that recipe. It looks like we've got the electrum foil already, so I think we just put that back into that same machine. Order one of those up. Done. It surprises me sometimes when there's recipes that are that quick, and then you compare it to, say, processing something like making netherite ingots, and it's like 600 seconds or some ridiculous amount. But that's great tech. Oh, all right, that's cool. So I can start encoding these. So I'll do that offline and come back, and then we'll be able to tick some of these off. Almost finished IV, guys. That's amazing. I think we'll wrap it up here. That was a lot of chemistry involved in this episode. So now we can actually make those better circuits. There's so much stuff that we need to do with those, so that's very exciting. So I think in the next episode, we'll probably tackle those other multi-blocks that use all those weird alloys. It's overdue that we look at those, particularly the ones that go in the clean room. We're gonna have to shuffle some things around to fit them, but that's part of the process, really, isn't it? Don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already, and just look after yourselves. Thanks for watching, and cheers.